Assalamualaikum dan selamat sejahtera, anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda, dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa pada jam ini kita akan berikan laporan berita, bisnes, kewangan dan juga ekonomi dalam termasuk luar negara. Jadi kita mulakan dengan perkembangan tersebut. Kerajaan akan melipat gandakan usaha untuk memastikan Malaysia terus diiktiraf sebagai destinasi pelaburan serta rakan dagang yang boleh dipercayai kepada pelabur asing dari serata dunia. Kementerian Pelaburan, Perdagangan dan Industri MITI berkata, dari sudut peluang, Malaysia berpotensi mendapat manfaat daripada peralihan perdagangan global yang berlaku akibat ketegangan perdagangan antara Amerika Syarikat dengan China. Menerusi jawapan bertulis yang dimuat naik di portal Dewan Negara, kementerian itu berkata syarikat-syarikat dari serata dunia akan mencari lokasi pengeluaran dan sumber produk baharu bagi mengelakkan tarif yang tinggi. Ia bagi menjawab soalan Senator Datuk Lim Pei Han mengenai sejauh mana dasar Amerika untuk mengenakan tarif 10% ke atas barangan import dari China berpotensi menarik syarikat multinasional untuk memindahkan operasi ke Malaysia dan peluang yang boleh dinikmati negara khususnya dari segi pelaburan langsung asing dan potensi ekspor negara melalui dasar yang dibawa oleh Presiden Amerika ketika ini. MITI berkata perubahan dasar perdagangan yang dilaksanakan akan memberi impak ke atas Malaysia memandangkan Amerika merupakan antara rakan dagang Malaysia yang utama. Dari segi jangka pendek, Malaysia mungkin boleh mendapat manfaat daripada kenaikan tambahan tarif 10% yang dikenakan ke atas China dengan pengeluar dan pengeksport Malaysia boleh mengambil peluang untuk meningkatkan jumlah pengeluaran serta menggandakan jumlah ekspor ke Amerika Syarikat sebagai alternatif kepada barangan China. Menurut MITI, kerajaan juga perlu bersedia menangani implikasi negatif secara tidak langsung terhadap pengenaan tarif yang tinggi, terutamanya dalam jangka masa panjang. Katanya berkemungkinan besar produk China tidak dapat menembusi pasaran Amerika disebabkan harga yang tinggi. Maka, China akan meneroka pasaran baharu atau melimpahkan lebih banyak produk China di pasaran sedia ada yang lain. Perkara ini katanya akan menjejaskan pasaran ekspor Malaysia di negara-negara ketiga seperti memberi persaingan kepada pengeluar domestik, memandangkan kebanyakan produk yang dihasilkan China adalah amat kompetitif dari segi harga disebabkan kos pengeluaran yang lebih rendah. Negeri akan menerusi jawapan perindustrian ekonomi biru di Kudat bertujuan meningkatkan pendapatan negeri dan memberi peluang kepada rakyat menyertai inisiatif itu. Kata Haji Ji, taman seluas sehingga 5,000 ekar itu telah berjaya menarik minat pelabur dari seluruh negara untuk turut sama terlibat.
Ekonomi biru yang merujuk penggunaan sumber laut dan pantai yang mampan bagi mencapai pembangunan ekonomi, meningkatkan kesejahteraan sosial tanpa menjejaskan alam sekitar, berpotensi membawa hasil kira-kira 3.25 bilion ringgit kepada Sabah. Malah Sabah juga merancang untuk membangunkan penukaran tenaga haba lautan menghasilkan tenaga boleh diperbaharui antara lautan panas dan sejuk selain berpotensi menjualnya ke utara Kalimantan, Indonesia.
Jadi kita ada rancangan untuk bangunkan OTEC ini, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion ini, yang boleh produce ini tenaga, boleh baharu antara haba lautan yang panas dengan yang sejuk di bawah. Jadi saya sudah arahkan Sekretariat SMJ supaya melawat Okinawa di Jepun, kerana sekarang dia orang sudah ada di Jepun. Jadi kita akan melawat di sana dan kita akan bawa teknologi itu di sini. Dan kalau kita boleh produce power ini, dia dekat dengan sempadan. Ya. Kalau kita mungkin ada kelebihan, kita boleh jual kepada mereka di utara Kalimantan, ya. Indonesia. Ya.
Masalah perumahan antara perkara asas yang mahu ditangani Kerajaan Negeri Sabah, khususnya dalam usaha memberi penempatan dan rumah selesa untuk mereka yang berpendapatan rendah. Ketua Menteri Sabah Datuk Seri Haji Dinur berkata, penduduk luar bandar yang berpindah ke bandar menghadapi masalah penempatan dan sewa yang tinggi yang akhirnya menyumbang kepada lambakan perumahan setinggal.
Justru satu program bertujuan untuk menyediakan rumah PPR atau rumah mampu milik di bawah selenggara kerajaan negeri dilaksanakan untuk individu yang layak. Inisiatif yang dipanggil Rumah Mesra SMJ di 73 kawasan Dewan Undangan Negeri DUN telah berjaya menyediakan 4,000 buah rumah untuk rakyat Sabah selepas dilancarkan 2 tahun lalu. Malah kerajaan negeri juga katanya merancang menjadikan kawasan setinggan di lokasi tertentu digezetkan sebagai kampung dengan menyediakan kemudahan asas termasuk jalan, bekalan air dan elektrik.
Bagi mereka yang menjadi setinggan itu, kita ada pendekatan yang lain juga. Ada kawasan-kawasan setinggan, warga tempatan itu, mungkin kawasan itu kita akan gazet atau wartakan sebagai kampung. Jadi diorang tidak lagi dianggap setinggan. Jadi kita akan bagi kemudahan jalan raya, air dan elektrik sebagainya.
Alright, moving on. Malaysia faces a turning point as AI reshapes jobs, raising concerns about workforce readiness and displacement. While reskilling initiatives exist, their effectiveness in bridging skill gaps remained uncertain. Short-term certifications like those under MBOT aim to boost employability, but their real value beyond credentialing is still debated. Beyond 2030, workforce adaptability is crucial. So the question is, how can Malaysia ensure its workforce remains resilient in the face of rapid AI advancements? And with us on the line, Helen Silvanathan, Exco of Women in Tech Malaysia, will share her insights on these pressing issues. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. All right. Firstly, Helen, let us know on how effective are Malaysia's current reskilling and upskilling initiatives in preparing workers for AI-driven job transformation, and what are the key gaps that still need to be addressed right now?
I believe Malaysia has never stopped on upskilling or reskilling the workforce that we have. However, we are now emphasizing on uplifting this to cross-selling as well. As you see, that AI has become a crucial part of our everyday living, and also the workforce intends to look at enhancing the capabilities so that we can be better off in the nation's goal of enhancing digital economy and technological capabilities. I think if you look at the recent Economist Impact Report, and it was supported by some of the large MNCs who are present in Malaysia, they found that 65% of Malaysian employees, they prioritize on the digital skills. And out of these 65, about 83% emphasize basic digital competencies. But the advanced skills in AI, machine learning, cloud computing, or cybersecurity also needs to gain that same traction. Only then we will be ready to face what we are facing as workforce globalization as well. Another area is government has also got programs, example, right? The Skills Malaysia 2.0 to boost participation in TVT. This program is largely to aim skills gap and prepare workers for technological roles. And we see a lot of industry collaboration, among stakeholders to develop the relevant technical human capital. I emphasize the word relevant because it has to be industry relevant, and we need to align training, certification programs so that it's in line with the industry needs and global standards, so that the workforce adaptability is there. You asked about identifying gaps. I think the biggest gap right now we have is the advanced digital skills shortage. And that's why we keep borrowing resources from neighboring countries or advanced countries. However, if we continue to upskill, cross-skill in the notable areas like, for example, data analytics, machine learning, I believe these will help to address the gap that hampers us to fully leverage the AI technology. Another area is lifelong learning culture. I think as Malaysians, right, we need to keep teaching our next generation, our future of the workforce, that it is very, very important to cultivate a culture of continuous learning to keep the pace with the rapid technology advancement. And this includes, right, the cultural learning as well. Because when AI comes, we wish to humanize the AI so that we live in a country that is adaptable to interpersonal and intercultural communication.
So shortages is one of the key concerns when it comes to leveraging AI or artificial intelligence in the workplace or workforce in general. But Helen, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that the short-term courses certified by MBOT or MBOT are genuinely improve employability and do not become a mere credentialing exercises, in your opinion?
MBOT has been doing this consistently. I think if you know the history of what they have been trying to do in enhancing employability, they continue to look at the needs and continuous professional development. Lately, they have also done a lot of things like accreditation of training providers and programs, right? The approval of the training providers is very key, because if you authorize and accredit courses that are relevant for the future of the right skills, then this brings across industry standards and also cultural and our future current technology needs. I believe MBOT is also trying to align this with industry requirements. They are collaborating with multiple stakeholders, identifying skill gaps, and designing courses, right, that addresses the needs. There is also training outcomes alignment with market requirements. Another area that I believe MBOT can further improve is seeking continuous feedback, because as industry players, right, and as part of technology leadership, I totally believe that continuous feedback is important, because that's when we can update course content, we can remain relevant, and we can provide the right education and the right assessment for people to be ready and be able to be enhancing their own employability. Then MBOT, I think, also has another ongoing training capacity, which is known as continuous professional development. A lot of us, we need to continuously keep our professional development up to the par with global standardization. So a lot of these accredited short courses, workshops, these are led by MBOT, and I believe that it maintains a lot of standards that's required. We need to make sure that we are taking the right relevant workshops, or maintaining our own ability to be able to verify the quality and relevance that we need for development of our professionalism.
All right, with AI is used to actually help with the human work nature on a daily basis, we know that it is expected to disrupt over 30% of jobs. So how can Malaysia balance workforce displacement with economic growth, and also what policies are needed to prevent job polarization? Helen?
To mitigate this job displacement, we need reskilling, we need upskilling, we need cross-skilling. I think I mentioned these earlier as well. I mean, we talked about AI-induced changes and providing targeted training programs so that we can equip our workforce with relevant skills. For instance, right, I believe recently the government has recognized they need to train over 600,000 workers within 3 to 5 years to remain competitive. How are we going to do this, right? So we have to involve our collaboration with public sectors, with the government, with education industry, the community. For example, Women in Tech Malaysia, I would like to allude that we are looking at areas that requires a certain level of capacity growth that it can match to the skills gap that we are facing. And then promoting AI-driven economy sectors. The government does this continuously in the manufacturing because robotic was there from the beginning. But there are other industries that need to be stimulated for job creation, because otherwise we will have reskilling, upskilling, but are we also looking at the economic sectors? That's a question to be asked. And establishing a special economy zone, for example, in Johor, right, to attract AI and manufacturing investment. They have started doing a lot of things, and they aim to create thousands of jobs and bolster economic activity. But this is what exactly we need to be doing. And I mentioned about the public-private partnerships. I believe recently a lot of news has been enhanced about Google's planned $1 billion data centers investment, and it also is expected to create jobs and contribute significantly to our economy by 2030. So all of this facilitates the development of AI infrastructure. So if you ask the question of, is this going to disrupt jobs? We have to continuously reskill ourselves so that it doesn't become a disruption, but it becomes an enhancement to our workforce. And then policy settings. As you know, right, policy setting is so important in AI. Anything can happen to your face today, and it can be used for something that is not very pleasant as well. So ensuring policies is very important. It can be economic policies as well, because that promotes equitable growth across various sectors. And it can prevent the job polarization that we always think about, right? It includes that industries that employ a broad spectrum of skills, they tend to have better benefits of the usage of AI. Sometimes when we think of AI, we only think of it as in affecting the technology, but our usage in the daily environment, things that we used to buy differently, we're now buying using e-shopping, for example. So the e-retailing concept has an AI chatbots, for example, how we reflect and communicate in online buying. That has also changed, right? So government also needs to think about implementing progressive taxation and always providing a society safety net. Why I say safety net? Because when the unemployment benefits and job transition happens, right, we want to ensure, as community as well, that social safety nets help to mitigate the adverse effects of job displacement. That's always the worry of a lot of people, right? And supports especially the affected individuals during the transition period. Again, I want to really allude that the lifelong learning and adaptability is really the key thing. Today we talk about only ChatGPT. There's more than ChatGPT in using what is required for your daily mundane task that can be used as to make your job more effective and reducing the job of doing mundane tasks again and again. Yeah, I believe the policies are very, very key for us in the future.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that we can look at, or another strategy and a key important thing to take note as well, is on the stronger public-private partnerships to accelerate AI skill development and to ensure that training programs meet real industry demands for this AI landscape, which is very dynamic. So I would like to say thank you so much to Helen Selvanathan, the Exco of Women in Tech Malaysia, for your insights and sharings. And you can find this whole conversation on all of our social media platforms, and that includes astroawani.com.
AirAsia akan pindah balik semua perkhidmatan domestiknya dari lapangan terbang Sultan Abdul Aziz Shah, lapangan terbang Subang, ke lapangan terbang antarabangsa Kuala Lumpur 2 KLIA 2 berkuat kuasa 7 April 2025. Langkah itu dibuat untuk meningkatkan kecekapan operasi kerana permintaan perjalanan yang semakin meningkat serta untuk memperbaiki pengalaman penerbangan penumpang. Dengan jumlah penumpang antara Kuala Lumpur dan destinasi utama seperti Kota Kinabalu dan Kuching meningkat secara signifikan melebihi 16% dari tahun ke tahun, penggabungan operasi domestik di KLIA 2 membolehkan syarikat menampung penambahan trafik penumpang dengan lebih baik. Digital Nasional Berhad DNB dan Ericsson memeterai perkongsian strategik untuk bekerjasama mempercepatkan transformasi digital perusahaan di seluruh Malaysia melalui teknologi 5G dan 5G Advanced. Langkah tersebut bertujuan menyokong cita-cita negara dalam misi menjadi peneraju digital global sambil memacu pertumbuhan ekonomi dan inovasi merentas pelbagai industri yang menumpukan kepada pendigitalan perusahaan. Kejayaan Sunway Construction Group berhad memperoleh kontrak berjumlah 1.5 bilion ringgit bagi melaksanakan pembangunan berorientasikan transit sistem transit rapid RTS-TOD di Bukit Cagar, Johor, menandakan peralihan strategik daripada kebergantungan kepada projek pusat data DC buat masa ini. CGS International berkata projek baharu itu akan mengurangkan pendedahan kumpulan kepada projek pusat data daripada 55% buku pesanan berjumlah 7.5 bilion ringgit pada Disember 2024 kepada 44% pada Mac 2025. Bagaimanapun, firma pendidikan itu menjangkakan peratusan itu akan meningkat semula dengan potensi pengembangan 2 projek pusat data sedia ada dalam buku pesanan semasa Sunway Construction. Laporan penuh di saluran 501 dan astroawani.com serta daganus.com.
Baik, untuk waktu ini saya akan bawakan perkembangan terkini berkenaan dengan ringgit di mana ia ditutup rendah berbanding dolar Amerika pada Isnin susulan kebimbangan berterusan terhadap perang dagang sementara tekanan deflasi di China semakin memberi kesan kepada mata wang Asia. Rakan kongsi pengurusan SPI Asset Management Stephen Ines bagaimanapun berkata mata wang tempatan itu tidak akan mengalami penurunan ketara ekoran keputusan terkini Bank Negara Malaysia untuk mengekalkan kadar faedah pada paras yang stabil terus memberikan sokongan yang menghadkan penurunan ringgit. Manakala pada pembukaan ringgit berada pada paras tersebut dan melihat kepada hari kedua minggu ini, ringgit lihat dalam trend terkawal dalam tempoh terdekat antara yang saya akan tunjukkan pada setakat hari ini pada hari Selasa 2025 pada 11 hari bulan 3. Kalau boleh saya tunjukkan untuk setakat hari ini, ringgit berada pada paras 4.434 setakat jam 9.22 pagi dan kalau boleh saya tunjukkan kita tengok pada 10 hari bulan semalam ringgit itu mengukuh. Kalau line ini menunjukkan turun, ia menunjukkan ringgit itu mengukuh. Manakala kalau ia menunjukkan pergerakan itu menaik, menunjukkan ringgit itu melemah ataupun menyusut. Jadi untuk perbandingan antara hari ini dan semalam kita dapat saksikan pada 10 hari bulan ringgit itu mengukuh dan berada pada paras 4.4090 manakala hari ini ia menyusut kembali dalam meningkat kepada 4.434 dan kita akan saksikan perkembangan esok pula bagaimana. Dan kalau kita akan saksikan pula berkenaan dengan pergerakan ringgit berbanding dengan dolar Singapura, ringgit ditutup rendah berbanding dolar Amerika pada Isnin berikutan kebimbangan perang dagang dan tekanan deflasi di China yang menjejaskan mata wang Asia. Kalau boleh saya tunjukkan perbandingan antara ringgit dan juga dolar Singapura untuk hari ini ia berada pada paras 3.3241 untuk hari ini. Kalau kita nak tunjukkan juga kalau kita bandingkan dengan semalam, kalau boleh saya tunjukkan di sini. Kita tunjuk dalam sekitar seminggu lah, kalau boleh kita tunjukkan dalam sekitar seminggu kita dapat saksikan pergerakan ringgit itu menunjukkan penyusutan yang paling ketara pada sekitar bulan 4 memasuki bulan 5, Mei, Julai, September dan November dan paling kukuh adalah sekitar pada bulan 9 dan bulan 10 tahun lalu 2024 namun ia kekal stabil dalam julat yang sama iaitu sekitar 3.350 antara 3.250 juga antara julat ini dan ini menunjukkan perbandingan di mana kita akan memberi kesan juga kepada mereka yang bekerja ataupun rakyat Malaysia yang bekerja di Singapura. Itu adalah berkenaan dengan perkembangan ringgit berbanding dengan dolar Singapura. Seterusnya adalah berkenaan dengan Bursa Malaysia yang ditutup rendah pada Isnin susulan jualan berterusan dalam saham wajaran tinggi terpilih diterajui oleh kaunter utility, telekomunikasi dan media serta sektor perkhidmatan kewangan. Pada 5 petang, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI atau FBM KLCI susut 10.81 mata atau 0.70% kepada 1,536.46 daripada paras penutup 1,547.27 pada Jumaat minggu lepas. Dan bagi prestasi pagi Selasa setakat 11 Mac 2025, Bursa Malaysia ketika ini berada pada paras, kalau saya boleh tunjukkan di sini, untuk setakat hari ini pada jam 9.10 pagi, ia berada pada paras 1,522.69, menurun 13.77 mata dan 0.90%. Dan kita saksikan sikit dalam jangka masa seminggu, ia berada pada paras antara julat 1,580 dan 1,520 dan ia kekal di bawah paras 1,600 untuk jangka masa seminggu ini. Dan saya akan teruskan juga dengan perkembangan di Amerika Syarikat pula, di mana Presiden Donald Trump's tariffs have spooked investors with fears of an economic downturn driving a stock market sell-off that has wiped out $4 trillion from the S&P 500's peak last month when Wall Street was cheering much of Trump's agenda. A barrage of new Trump policies has increased uncertainty for businesses, consumers and investors, notably back and forth tariff moves against major trading partners like Canada, Mexico and China.
The stock market sell-off deepened on Monday. The benchmark S&P 500 fell 2.7%, its biggest daily drop of the year. The Nasdaq Composite slid 4%, its largest one-day decline since September 2022. The S&P 500 on Monday closed down 8.6% from its February 19 record high, shedding over $4 trillion in market value since then and nearing a 10% decline that would represent a correction for the index. The tech-heavy Nasdaq ended Thursday down more than 10% from its December high. Trump over the weekend declined to predict whether the US could face a recession as investors worried about the impact of his trade policy. Beyond the tariff uncertainty, investors are watching to see if lawmakers can pass a funding bill to avert a partial federal government shutdown, while a crucial report on inflation looms on Wednesday. The percentage of total corporate equities and mutual fund shares that are owned by the bottom 50% of the US population, ranked by wealth, stands at about 1%, while the same measure for the top 10% of the population by wealth stood at 87%, according to Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis data as of July 2024. The S&P 500 tallied back-to-back gains of over 20% in 2023 and 2024, led by mega-cap technology and tech-related stocks such as Nvidia and Tesla that have struggled so far in 2025, dragging major indexes down with them. Those tech and mega-cap stocks that had propelled the market higher the past 2 years were hit hard on Monday. The S&P 500's technology sector dropped 4.3%, while Apple and Nvidia both fell about 5% and Tesla tumbled 15%.
Markets continue to sell off in the wake of additional and continued uncertainty around what the Trump tariff situation is going to look like. We have a lot of different numbers and a lot of different trading partners that keep coming up in the news. And we're kind of waiting to see where things land today, the next hour, the next week. And market participants hate uncertainty. And there's a lot of uncertainty around this right now. I think the speed with which the market is reassessing probabilities around recession is directly linked with the two things. One, uncertainty around tariffs and what the impact may have on inflation and just the general economic outlook. And then two, there's a bit of a growth scare that's going on at the same time. If you look at GDP growth in the fourth quarter, which was 2.5% plus, right now, GDP now, which is kind of a real cast, a nowcast forecast, it's not a forecast, it's a nowcast existing of what's happening in the economy. That number is like a negative 2.5% right now. And so those two things compounded by consumer sentiment, which is just really bad right now, those things are adding up to this, moment of volatility in the market.
So that's a little update on the US market, where it's really impacted by the Trump tariffs. 2.0 of his joining back in the White House. But now let's take a look at the latest overview of the S&P 500 index. As of this morning, as you can see, it's a sea of red with spots of green here and there. But as you can see, for Intel, the US President Donald Trump has imposed a new Sunday that the United States had just about ended a suspension. But we're going to look at Intel. As you can see, if we want to look at on the semiconductor as well, we want to start with Microsoft. If you can see that it was down by 3.34% and it stood at 380.16. And Oracle is down by 4.11% and stood at the level of 148.79. That's on the technology, as we can see here. But on Apple, it shows that it was down by 4.85%, and Tesla was about 15.43%. And this is some of the updates on the US market. But on Intel update, US President Donald Trump said on Sunday that the United States had just about ended a suspension of intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and that he expects good results out of upcoming talks with Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia. And he asked if he would consider ending the suspension. Trump said, we just about have, and we just about have. And CIA Director John Ratcliffe said on Wednesday the US had halted intelligence sharing with Ukraine, piling pressure on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to cooperate with Trump in convening peace talks with Russia. All right, now on the updates on NVIDIA, I will show it shows the color of red, which it shows it was down by 5.07 and stood at the level around 106.98. And this is the update on NVIDIA. And on the same semiconductor updates on Broadcom, it was down by 5.39% and stood at the level of 184.45. And those are the updates on the semiconductors. But the latest updates on NVIDIA is CoreWeave, an artificial intelligence startup backed by NVIDIA, has signed a 5-year contract worth $11.9 billion with OpenAI ahead of its hotly anticipated stock market launch. And as part of the pact, CoreWeave will provide AI infrastructure to OpenAI, CoreWeave said in a statement on Monday, confirming an earlier exclusive report from Reuters. And the deal will give OpenAI a stake in CoreWeave, which will issue shares worth $350 million to the ChatGPT maker through a private placement at the time of its initial public offering. And that's on the update on NVIDIA. And move on to Apple and Meta. I've explained earlier on Apple, it was down by 4.85 and stood at the level of 227.48. And Meta was down as well by 4.42% and stood at the level of 597.99. And the latest updates on Apple and Meta, these two platforms are set to face modest fines for allegedly breaching landmark rules aimed at reining in their power, people with direct knowledge of the matter said on Sunday. And both companies have been in the European Commission's crosshairs since last year for potential breaches of the Digital Market Act, which could cost companies as much as 10% of their global annual sales. And the act, which may become law in May 2022, seeks to make it easier for people to move between competing online services like social media platforms, internet browsers and app stores, allowing smaller companies to compete with big tech. The EU antitrust enforcer is focused on making sure the companies comply with the law rather than sanctioning them, the sources said, explaining the rationale for modest fines. And move on to Tesla as well. Just a quick update on Tesla. It was down by 15.43%. And the latest update is Elon Musk is running his businesses with great difficulty while working with the Trump administration. And the Tesla CEO said on Monday in an interview with Fox Business. And his remarks followed Tesla losing $130 billion in stock market value in a broad sell-off on Wall Street that left the electric car makers' share at their lowest since October. And Tesla's share slumped 15% to $222.15, weighing heavily on the Nasdaq, and which tumbled 4% on fears that the Trump administration tariffs against major U.S. trading partners could throw the country into a recession. And the decline in Tesla's market capitalization on Monday eclipsed $86 billion combined stock market value of Ford Motor and General Motors GM. And that's on the latest updates on the U.S. markets as per shared earlier. And you can find this whole discussion on the latest updates on finviz.com, and more updates after this with my colleague Tamina Kausji. So we'll be right back.
The future of surgery is upon us. It's a new era of surgery that's really guided by AI. As the surgeon is conducting the surgery, we can walk them through, here are the 8 steps that the literature would suggest that you do in order, and how long it should take for that surgery. So you're providing them a real-time roadmap, and then along the way you're identifying structures like no-fly zones. Don't go here, you know, that's a critical organ. You can light it up and make it a certain color. So you can provide this type of real-time feedback. If you're using robotic surgery, you can provide haptics that just stop the robot from going in a certain place. So we took 13 million colonoscopy videos, and we used that to train a machine learning or an AI algorithm to identify these polyps. And we've got it now to the point where it's 99.7% sensitive, meaning it picks it up almost 100% of the time. We implant a stimulator in a patient, and then the wires from that stimulator, the leads, go to the brain, and they stimulate very specific structures that really help with the Parkinson's symptoms. And it takes a person that has all these muscle spasms and it calms them down, and so they can live a normal life. We sense the signal in the brain, so we know exactly where the Parkinson's is, and then we can adjust our stimulation in real time. And so it's really exciting, and this is now considered to be a brain-computer interface, and this would be the most scaled brain-computer interface in the world right now. We have 40,000 patients already on this therapy. We have a little device that just goes under the skin, not considered a surgical procedure. In many cases, you don't even need a stitch. It Bluetooths to your phone into the cloud, and we really can monitor. It's like a little angel on your shoulder watching over you and determining, you know, do you have AFib today? And alerting your physician that they need to reach out, and maybe you need to start taking your meds again. Maybe you need to increase the dosage. But in the flip side, when the AFib's gone, you can stop the med.
call it DALI AI. It is the 911 for farmers. It speaks 27 languages. 20 of those languages are African. DALI delivers information in the language that people understand. So we support, in Ghana, for instance, Twi, Ewe, in Kenya, Swahili, in Nigeria, Yoruba. Research shows if you give information to people in the language that they understand, adoption goes up by up to 60%. So just by merely giving information to farmers in the language they understand, they're able to adopt. The final thing that DALI does is also helping to detect crop diseases offline for about 10 major crops in Africa. So cassava, which is a major staple, cocoa, coffee, and many others. So an extension officer can go into the field, take pictures of what is happening on the ground, and in real time know the disease that is there and also make recommendations. Basically, what that means is that we can tell what's happening on the farm. We can tell the regenerative farming practices that's happening on the farm. We can tell the soil condition. We can tell the above ground carbon stock based on the practices that are happening as well. Organic fertilizer has been invented many, many years ago. High quality seeds, solar irrigation, all these things are already there. We know that if you give irrigation to farmers, they can increase their yield and increase their income by multiple folds. The challenge is the ability to afford it. The financing schemes don't support them very well. Farmers have money maybe 6 months out of the 12 months in a year. So making sure that they have flexible financing, not just affordable, flexible financing that is tied to their seasonality goes a long way and drives adoption.
On average, most people at work spend more than half of their time in meetings where very little gets done. And oftentimes people walk away more depressed than they were when they came in. I think the point of meeting is to do, to bond, to learn, or to create. And we don't need to do that together every day. We need to do it together about once a week. There's an emerging body of evidence suggesting that the 4-day work week may be an advantage for well-being and work-life balance without any cost to productivity. And in some cases, even benefits to productivity. Anytime you have an idea, you can pitch it to anyone in the hierarchy above you. And if one person says yes to it, it gets a green light, and now you can begin to tinker on it. And I think that's a great way to make sure that pilots happen, that people end up experimenting and tinkering and ultimately innovating. Number one, we need to give people demos. Figure out the skills that are most critical for the job, and then give people a challenge where they can showcase those skills. That's where you really get to see their capabilities. It's not how they perform in the first interview that ultimately shows their agility. It's how well they learn and progress from what didn't go well in the first interview into improvement in the second interview. And there's some brand new evidence actually from military jobs that if you give people a do-over, you become better at predicting who's going to be successful in your organization. Good news is there's a simple workaround that's been studied for years. It's called brain writing. All you do is you give people a problem or a prompt in advance. You let them generate their own ideas independently. And then ideally you keep them anonymous and you have everybody do a separate rating of the potential of that idea. At that point, having gotten independent idea generation and judgment, you bring the group together to evaluate and refine.
If you are acting in an international environment, either owning assets in different geographies, trading with different geographies, having this kind of geopolitical muscle is a must. I would say that in the middle of the 2010s, we saw a shift from a world that was still very much imprinted by neoliberalism, free trade, essentially the kind of world of the Bretton Woods system, into a system where tariffs became more important, where conflicts became more important. So yes, there has been, I think, a shift towards a much more geopolitically driven world over the last 5 to 10 years. For many companies, these geopolitical shifts have come when they were relatively unprepared. And there are companies that really point back to the beginning of the war in Ukraine, where they say, well, that's actually a moment where geopolitics hit our agenda. And we know that many companies, for example, lost assets in Russia after that conflict. So I think companies need to prepare for a new reality, and that what we call at BCG building up your geopolitical muscle, which has nothing to do with the physical exercise, but which has to do with the ability of companies to really anticipate these developments and react to them in a structured way. There are companies who have a team of geopolitical experts who look at the development of the trade landscape, who look at the development of international relations, who use scenario planning, wargaming, to really look at how can they position different geographies, who also make sure that in their decision-making, you don't just look at discounted cash flow analyses, but you also look at geopolitical risk. So that's what I would say is a capability and ability base of a geopolitical muscle. And then there are actions like, well, how much do you diversify your supply chain? How do you ensure that you have a supply chain resilience? I think these are the two elements which we describe as a geopolitical muscle. On one side, the ability, and on the other side, the action. Don't just focus on what happens short term, but keep the long term in your area of attention. I think we tend to be too much impacted by what's happening today and tomorrow and the day after. Now, if you're a well-versed CEO, you have to talk about 2 or 3 futures. You need to think in scenarios. You need to have alternative images of the future to be prepared for, I would say, the increase of exogenous shocks, which are part of the reality in which we are.
Nak coklat? Hari ni tak boleh. Nanti saya kena dengan mak saya.
Pepsodent baharu disahkan halal. Mikrokalsium aktif dan Pro-Florida Complex membantu memperbaiki lubang halus akibat makanan manis sebelum menjadi kaviti untuk perlindungan maksimum. Pepsodent.
Nama dekat dia yang nak kata dah. Gapa dia hak jadah buat. Gapa dia hak jaga buat. Ada restu.
KAHA, Kapla High Council. Sewa dan stream on demand atau sila ke saluran 480.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaushi. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now, this week on Future Affairs, we will be discussing optimizing workplace well-being. In Malaysia, work-life balance remains a significant concern. A 2024 study ranked Malaysia as indeed the second worst country for work-life balance amongst 60 high GDP nations, with an average work week of 40.8 hours. Now, additionally, employees often work beyond the standard 48-hour week. In the banking sector, the average is around 52 hours. Now, this overwork contributes to burnout, absenteeism, as employees adjust their schedules to compensate. However, 9-to-5 workplace standards are also evolving very quickly, driven by technological advancements, shifting workplace cultures, changing demographics, and economic strategies. These shifts are further amplified by the impact of AI, the recent pandemic, the evolving expectations of the workforce. Now, around 60.3% of Malaysian employees that were surveyed prioritize work-life balance, which is highlighting increasing calls for change. The newly launched Malaysia Wellbeing at Work Index report provides crucial insights into workplace well-being trends across industries in Malaysia. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of Hetal Doshi, organizational psychologist, CEO of OSIG and founder of the Wellbeing at Work movement, joining me in the studios, joined by Dr. Kenneth Kafaki, professor at Sunway University and academic fellow, and they are going to be right here in the studios for a very timely discussion on optimizing workplace well-being. A very good morning to the both of you. How are we doing?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
Fantastic.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So a really timely discussion, Hetal, as well as Dr. Kenny. I would actually like to, before we dive deeper into the findings, let's set the stage. Hetal, perhaps you'd be the best to tell us a little bit more about how did this entire Wellbeing at Work Index originate? What was your thought process behind this, given your strong background in industrial and organizational psychology?
Right. So as an organizational psychologist, we really look at the workplace like athletic workforce. You're trying to score a goal in the shortest period of time. And we were very, very lucky. In 2017, I encountered a Tan Sri Wan Zul from Petronas, who was the ex-president of Petronas, and he had asked me this question in our engagement. He said, Hetal, I've got a workforce of 47,000 people. How do I maximize their potential, especially during challenging times? And as we see the world getting more and more challenging. And so that question actually started my, the power of one fantastic question can take you another 7 to 10 years to figure out how to answer that question. And so we started wondering, we hire people in the workplace, we want them to maximize their potential so that we can achieve the outcomes that we want. So that thought process was actually what led to the Wellbeing at Work Index that we've designed.
Right.
In trying to maximize potential, what are the risks that people experience? How well are they coping? And how safe do they feel to have the right conversation at the right time with the right person to get to the right outcome? So that was really the birth of how the Wellbeing at Work Index came about.
And it's very interesting because you mentioned timeline-wise, so that was 2017. Almost a decade on, smack in the middle of, almost 2025. Here we are. So much has changed. Arguably, enough has happened in this almost decade, which did not even occur in the world of work over the past 50 to 80 years, right?
Yeah.
Things have really changed. So who actually commissioned this workplace well-being report and study, and you have launched it. This is of course not its first edition, but why are you so optimistic and interested about the findings which have come out of the most latest one?
Right. I think who commissioned this was frustration and anger.
All right.
Yeah, I think the anger and frustration of when we talk about mental health, it's always about mental illness, depression, anxiety, stress. But that's not what mental health really is about. The goal of it is really to be at the optimum state. And so we thought that the way it was being measured was not right. it is definitely the right time to be measuring things correctly for the benefit and the well-being of organizations and individuals as well. So that's, I think, where we are at right now. And we don't remain optimistic about the data, unfortunately, because year on year it's declining. But we do remain optimistic with the idea that when people get access to their own data and they are accountable to champion a better work life for themselves, it can lead to much better outcomes. So I think where we remain optimistic is in typically the awareness of what this data means for people.
Exactly. And of course, we're talking about the C-suite level, organizational champions and corporate leaders, right?
Exactly.
So shifting from there into Kenny, Dr. Kenny, tell me a little bit about the fact that we're looking at, of course, a lot of statistical data which has been collated, but it isn't just about the statistical dip. Echoing what Hazel had mentioned earlier, this is really about struggles that are faced by employees around Malaysian workplaces day on day, year on year. Let's dig into that.
Yeah, when we take a look at the data and it's reducing on all our variables, it's either the same or it's reducing year on year. I would not say we're at the point yet that we're in an absolute crisis, but it is deeply concerning. Everything is dropping. Our vulnerable groups, you know, females, younger employees, people with less tenure, people with lower job levels, year on year, it's increasingly getting worse for them compared to their exact counterparts who it's getting better year on year. It's almost like a seesaw effect. And that is concerning. As we get more data in the years to come, we'll be able to bridge the gap a lot more with this. But we were looking at this data and we were looking at the polar opposite. There was almost like a dichotomy happening between the various groups versus the more vulnerable groups. And what we found, we've started talking about, you know, we've had all of these terms in the last number of years, the great resignation, the great burnout, etc.
Sure, all these things that come into the pop culture parlance and everybody's buzzing about it for months on end, right?
Exactly, exactly. And then we were saying, you know, what could we have some sort of terminology to actually describe what's happening here currently in Malaysia with this data?
Right.
And we almost simultaneously came up with the term the great disillusionment of work, where people at work, particularly vulnerable groups, what we're talking about, they don't see work as worth it anymore. It's almost like that they have been missold something, that their aspirations, etc. And we're not saying that they're being crushed, but they're being severely dented in the workplace. And all these expectations, they're coming back to these individuals and they're basically asking questions in relation to, you know, should I continue with this? And this leads back into, you know, the great resignation, etc., that people feel they've been somewhat missold. And that is what we're saying is concerning. But more data definitely needed in that regard. But the disillusionment is definitely there. And when we talk to people, even at the university, young people, you know, a lot of my master's students, they're working adults. And they've gone into, you know, entry-level positions in HR departments, etc. And they're not at the level that they thought they would be. They're not progressing at levels that they thought they were. So they're returning to education to get more skills, etc. So this is kind of, it is concerning. And it's like with the statistics that you mentioned earlier, you know, work-life balance, working hours, etc. People are just becoming a little bit more disillusioned. And, you know, if this is not taken note of by the relevant people, organizations, government, trade unions, all these bodies, this could continue to manifest itself, and it could actually get worse. So it's very good at this point because, you know, we wanted to move towards evidence-based management.
Absolutely.
Everybody
yes. Not just identifying the issue at the heart of it, but also then, so where do we go from here? What do we do with this minefield of data, right?
Absolutely.
So I love the fact that you highlighted, and you've actually coined this term, the great disillusionment. And I think it speaks fundamentally to the meaning of what work is today in 2025, and honestly where we're going forward for the next 50 years of our lives, etc., especially for those who may just be starting out when it comes to their professional careers. Where do they picture themselves? Very different from somebody in maybe the 70s or even the 90s.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so Hazel, from there I'd like to actually dig deeper because also in light of the fact that tomorrow is International Women's Day, 8th of March, 2025. At the same time, the entire month is centered around a lot of conversations, positive as well as insightful, that focus on women. And never more than the fact that women, of course, are an increasing proportion of our workforce. So let's talk about what are some of the gender-related findings that came out from this report.
Super interesting stuff, actually, especially being female, right?
Yeah.
It means so much to me when I look at this data. So when we look at the experience of the exact same job between male counterpart and a female counterpart, so the biggest variance between two people in the exact same job would be, number one, my health, overall health and well-being would be 6% lower than my male counterpart. That's number one, immediately.
Okay, off the bat.
Off the bat. And when we asked people this, women who looked at their findings, they said, yeah, because every time we do work, we take on more stress, we take on more of the demands and the details. And we feel badly for the men, and we immediately want to step in and help them. So we take on more demands, we take on more details. So that's one part of it.
Okay, but what I'm actually hearing there is weaponized incompetence.
Wow.
Within the workspace, right?
Because, weaponized incompetence.
Yes, absolutely. Because when it comes to especially the gender roles and the different ways in which we are encultured and raised from the very time that we are boys and girls, it actually replicates itself in the way in which workplaces also play out. Certain detailed roles, for example, only women are seeing as perhaps being adept at it, being capable of it, and over time it can become habitual. Super interesting. All right.
I think so as well. And I think as you're saying that, you also have weaponized competence. So there's some things that the other gender would be very good at, and they would use that to a major advantage as well. The second thing that we're seeing as the biggest variance between male counterparts and female counterparts is in autonomy.
Okay.
So therefore, because I'm taking on more of a role and wanting to help and nurture and support, I lose my independence, autonomy, and freedom. And what that means for me is then I have less time to really look after what it is that I really, really want, because I'm busy taking care of everyone else that I feel I need to help. And so, yes, it is very painful when we look at a statistic like this. However, what we do when we share this data to female colleagues and we put them all in one room and we show them this data, of course, it starts with, like, you know, the commissioning starts with anger and frustration. Like, why are our lives worse off than a male counterpart?
Right, same role possibly. And
same role and all of that stuff. At the same time, you cannot outsource, even as women, no matter how much of policy and practice and whatever that we put into place.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think one of the best things that has happened through a lot of our evidence-based conversations, when we ask them, they say, you know what, Hital, no matter what companies do for us, we need to identify the women who have figured it out in male-dominated countries or circumstances.
Or industries,
or industries, or even the same role as, you know, that we have right now. Who would have figured out? And so when we look at the data set of women who are thriving in the exact same position as them, we then ask them, what is your weapon? What is your secret to this without compromising anything else in life? So I think the question, a better question then would be, what is it that certain women who preserve their health but also succeed in male-dominated circumstances, what is it that they did that helped them to succeed without compromising their well-being? And very often the answer goes, excellent negotiating skills.
Negotiating skills,
excellent negotiating skills.
Fantastic, because I distinctly remember reading so many corporate reports, etc., that evaluated in general women in the workplace being far poorer with negotiation skills as compared to their male counterparts.
Yeah, and when we dig down a little bit deeper, I mean, I can go on for hours, so I won't go into any further detail. When we dig down a little bit deeper, the reason why we negotiate poorly is because we have 6% lower self-esteem than our male counterpart.
Right.
So it first starts with all the doubts that we have of whether we are good enough and whether we will be liked when we say what we want to say. And that in itself is the first barrier of entry or exit of our voice. Then the negotiation may or may not take place. So we sometimes silence that and just say, you know what, forget about it, let me just take it on. So that's a very, very interesting finding based out of conversations that we've had with women.
I think it's very valuable, because what we're actually being able to identify right now is looking at the structural conditions which create this sort of a maelstrom in the workplace. It is a little bit of a quiet storm, because unless you're asking those right targeted questions, you're probably not going to be able to scratch much below the surface, right?
Well said with the quiet storm. And the structural thing is really internal as well. It's not just external. I think there's a lot of
correct. I wanted to actually quickly highlight an interesting statistic that, of course, came from a vast-scale study across 250 organizations in America recently, where it was actually discovered that about 76% of high-performing women reportedly received negative feedback from their managers, supervisors. Only 2% of high-performing men received the same. So it's speaking a lot about, these inherent complex subconscious as well as conscious biases, which then could perhaps lead to talent frustration for those who are already doing well, but at the same time are placed under comparatively unfair pressure in comparison to their male compatriots. Interesting points. Yes, Dr. Kenny, anything to add to that?
Absolutely. It's about, like what you were saying, it's about championing the success stories, and there are huge success stories. And then, a lot of experimentation has come out of the States, and even in doing performance appraisals, etc., if you put them gender blind, what you would see in the statistics that you gave, they would be completely alleviated. And it's just going to show that it's these subconscious or maybe even conscious biases that people have, that perhaps in male-dominated societies, that it's, females should be seen as more humble. And we need to challenge these assumptions, because if you see, all research coming out of engineering, which has now seen a huge growth in female participation.
That's right, STEM-related professions.
Exactly. They're seeing no difference in success rates. So it's kind of going back to those types of things, as in even in recruitment, etc., that if we do things as gender blind in the screening process at the very beginning, or looking at CVs, that it is just an individual, it is a human being first and foremost, rather than it's male or female, because being male or female is not an indicator of success in literally anything.
Or even competence.
Competence, exactly, all of these things. So it's, going back to possibly looking at things like that, championing success stories and challenging traditional assumptions, that males are traditionally engineers, females traditionally go into perhaps the nursing profession. These things definitely need to be challenged, and success stories can happen in all of them.
Absolutely, which also brings me back to the fact that this competency checking, which is a constant presence, particularly for minoritized or marginalized groups within workplaces, ultimately has a blowback effect. We'll of course dig deeper into specific age demographics, but before we move on, Hital, I'd love to actually focus a little bit on some actionable areas which organizations can take when they're paying attention to such data points, which is showing that, women are doing worse off, especially when they are also in similar roles at the workplace, but generally outside of the workplace, their roles and their personal lives or their home lives are very different from their male counterparts. So how can that be addressed in a sensitized manner?
It's a really tough one over here, isn't it? It's a very, very tough, unfair, potentially unfair experience. Let me just maybe give you an example of what an organization, because we are trying to outsource, right, trying to get a workplace to help us figure out what to do with our personal lives. Right? When we go back home, how are you going to support that for us? And that's not an easy thing to do. We were at a town hall, a recent town hall, where the CEO spoke for close to about 90 minutes. And the only one time where everybody stood up and clapped was when the CEO mentioned that, and we will also have a nursery within the building in the next 1 year, where all employees will have access to being able to put their kids over here in the nursery, and we're hoping to have a primary school. So only one time everybody clapped, and male, female, everybody stood up and started clapping.
Okay.
Right? So that obviously is very, very important, that now it's not just that you take care of us outside when we leave the organization, but help us put this within the organization so I can see my kid. Because it's very unsafe to leave the kids around somewhere else in somebody else's hands.
Sure, given the lack of, childcare infrastructure. So I'm just going to intervene over there because ultimately I think the focus is moving quite quickly into employees themselves recognizing that it's about parental or family-friendly policies,
Absolutely.
not just for the women in the workplace in one block and, let's not look at the men at all.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Thank you for
what
that,
was interesting,
Hazel.
though...
I'm sorry for that, but let's just go into a very quick break and we'll be back right after that with the rest of Niaga Spotlight and this interview focusing on optimizing workplace well-being.
Malaysia sebenarnya berada di kedudukan kedua terburuk di dunia berkaitan keseimbangan hidup dan kerja.
LRT3 sudah akan mula beroperasi suku ketiga 2025. Kerja-kerja fizikal dan penstrukturan sudah mencecah 95%. KPM sebenarnya sedang memperincikan cadangan untuk menyediakan allowance kos sara hidup tingkatan 6. Libat urus antara umat Islam dan agama lain penting supaya dapat mengelakkan ataupun membawa kepada Islamofobia.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tamina Kaushi. And today we're talking about all things optimizing workplace well-being together with Hetal Doshi as well as Dr. Kenny Kafaki in the studios live with me now. So let's move along into talking about some other workplace groups which are traditionally either minoritized, not paid too much of attention to, or perhaps even ignored a little bit, right? Dr. Kenny, I'd love to ask you about looking at Gen Z workers as a block. What were some interesting, maybe even unexpected insights or things which you have actually been noticing as a trajectory but were then confirmed and validated by the research findings for Gen Z workers?
Yeah, jumping straight into the data, three of the biggest data points that we had were had 20% variance over their counterparts. It was a meaning of work. Younger generation in terms of meaning of work, they want to do something that they consider very valuable to society. It's not just, chasing the almighty dollar anymore. They want to do something meaningful with their life. And that came out as huge. Other things, role clarity. And when they enter into our workforce, they just enter in as a number in a lot of cases, an employment number, and that there's an individual behind that. And what are they there actually to do? Vague, job descriptions, etc., that people get. They're there to help, to assist, etc. But it's not giving them enough clarity as into what they're actually doing. And, one of the worst things we can ever do is not allow somebody to win. And role clarity provides a goal for people. It provides an end point. I always go back to the analogy. You would never start a running race if you didn't know how long it was going to be.
Definitely not.
You would not do that.
That's so true.
And it's, allowing this win. And then other things then, job satisfaction. And job satisfaction is huge. They're not getting the job satisfaction because the meaning of work and role clarity are somewhat vague. And, this is huge. This manifests itself across the board. But like if you even look back in traditional research, there's this digital nomad view of younger employees, that they job hop, that they do all of these things. But when we go back to research, it's the exact same thing. They look for two things. They look for job security and they look for a decent wage. And those two things have, in a lot of cases, been taken away. We cannot, as economies have changed, businesses have changed, we cannot afford to allow people job security anymore. And wages, unfortunately, Malaysia does have for younger generations lots of wage stagnation, which is leading to people, brain drain, etc. We see this across the board. We see this in the nursing profession, even recently in the newspapers, all over media, that because of a nurse shortage of young people entering the nursing profession.
Sure, and not because qualifications are reducing, but because people are going to different countries, perhaps, with the currency exchange.
Dubai,
Absolutely.
all of these places. And that is causing a problem. And the solution to it, increase their working hours, which may be a short-term solution, but it'll perpetuate the problem.
Deeply counterintuitive.
Exactly. It'll perpetuate it going forward. And it's just understanding this from, young people. They are not totally different. They have the same kind of goals and aspirations that we had. This is not a generational thing. People do want decent work, they want good wages, and they want some semblance of job security. And that has not changed, and that will not change. As we go forward in 20 years' time, if they're having the same generational conversations, I can't guarantee it, but I would predict that people would ask for, they'd look for or aspire towards the exact same things.
Absolutely. So never mind 2030, what about 2050, right? But speaking of something a little more current, and I really want to mention this because it's had a bit of a resurgence. Not a new concept, actually, but something which is all the rage amongst Gen Z on TikTok, which is micro-retirement. Now, this was actually something that was written about by Timothy Ferris in his 2007 book, The 4-Hour Work Week. So basically, it hinges around the fact that increasingly Gen Z, they are taking up to year-long sabbaticals from work after having worked a stretch of maybe 2 or 3 years in order to pursue their hobbies, travel, other passions, etc. So any thoughts on the revival or the resurgence or this deep interest right now, or as a way to combat burnout and stress in the workplace?
Yeah, and well, just to echo what you said there, it goes back to, this micro-retirement. It goes back to wage security. So they don't see the financial, because of what we spoke about, wage stagnation, so that if they kind of project themselves through their entire career towards retirement, they don't see that they're going to have the same benefits.
So live for today or for the next year?
Well, maybe not just live for today, but,
And you still have the relative youth and health to go back to work again?
Yeah, live while you're still young. There's nothing wrong with taking that sabbatical, that kind of micro-retirement kind of way of doing things. That's all fine. But it's just to understand, come back to organisations, etc. You've got to give them a reason to stay. You've got to give them a reason to not do that. And it goes back to, meaning of work, etc. Making work worth it. At Sunway University, we teach our HR students, with the CIPD, it's about championing better work and better working lives. And a lot of them, they kind of feel a little bit alienated from this. And, they're voting with their feet, whether it's doing exactly what you said, micro-retirement, or they're job hopping, etc. This is the message they're receiving. We're sending them a signal, and that's what they're receiving, and they're acting upon it. And, we can get into criticism of it, etc. But, to me, it's a little bit like fighting the tide, coming in and out. You're not going to win that battle.
Very true.
They have a different mentality. They have a different way of looking at it. They're changing it. They will change the workplace, whether we like it or not.
Sure, they've already overtaken boomers proportionally in the workplace around the world for the first time in 2025. So, Hatel, looking at different dimensions of the intersectionality of Gen Z's challenges, what are your thoughts around what metrics or what placements can workplaces have so that actually they are responding to the feedback that is coming out from what's going to make up a larger proportion of their workforce than ever, but at the same time looking at the specific challenges, digital fluency, there's a lot of heightened societal expectations, but also economic instability. All of this as a whole does not seem like it's an opportunity for employers or organizations, but tell me some thoughts from your space.
I think there's a huge, I don't know if I can call it a great distraction.
Okay.
Right? It's a great distraction because, yes, micro-retirement without macro work, I don't understand it. Yes, Tim Ferriss wrote the book. It's a 4-hour work week. But he designed it. It made sense for him and it worked out for him. So I would say that for all organizations out there, and I've seen so many organizations giving in to management trainees, people coming in who are new and fresh. The more you give in doesn't mean the higher the success rate. It does not mean that if you give them what they want, that they're going to give you what you need.
Or that there's traction and they're going to come back beyond 6 months.
Not at all.
Even, never mind a year.
No, the whole idea that if you give them what they want equals to they will give me what I want does not exist. We were looking for a role the other day, and it's data and dashboard. 40 candidates applied. 39 of them did not last in any of the 2 to 3 organizations that they were with for more than 6 to 7 months. Right. So well-being for who really? Well-being for what? And well-being why? So I would say for any organization, yes, it might be difficult to fight the tide. Yes, they might say that this is what they want. But as an organization, you need to decide what it is that you really, really want. I think Netflix, apologies if this is any compete whatsoever, but Netflix did it really well. They were very clear about what it is that they really wanted.
Okay.
And they designed the entire movement of hiring towards being able to score that goal for themselves. And interestingly, the younger generation, they sign up for boot camps, they sign up for HIT, like the most torturous kind of experiences.
Sure.
We never used to do that before. So they do enjoy, I'm not saying torture, but they do enjoy hard work, they do enjoy hard labor, they do enjoy a great challenge.
Different perspectives,
I would say make
new
it
skills.
even harder for them. And funnel in the top 5-10% that would be able to do that, and make, maybe you can't fight an ocean, but make your organization like a river. Like, make sure that your guiding principles are in that direction, and get the right people to be able to fulfill it. Less doesn't mean worse. Get less, but get great ones, and pay them super duper well, and make the others say, I wish I could join that, because that will be worth it. Effort versus reward. People will get paid so much more to be able to do a great job. Which is required, really, really required in a day and age like this as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say definitely don't get distracted by whims and fancies of those that have not found grounding or footing yet in the world, unfortunately.
And at the same time, also, it, I think, demands of organizations that they be a lot limber and much more insightful in projecting what kind of strategies they want for workplace productivity, as well as assigning people into not just teams, but also roles that are then actually maximizing the type of skill sets each person is bringing in with them. So great, quantity over quality, but also pay them really well. So I'm pretty sure Gen Z would resonate with that. So from there, moving on, Dr. Kenny, I'd like to ask you, expanding a little bit on what Hazel just mentioned, the fact that it's really difficult to find employees in general these days who have any length of tenure at organizations. So what are some ways in which organizations can better approach lending a sense of belonging and identity, and also workplace cohesion, seeing that now you're going to have a significant majority in your workplace who are less tenured workers?
Yeah, and like the stats you said at the beginning, etc., that perpetuates this. It's probably, what organizations can do is to understand boomerang employment. And boomerang employment has huge benefits across the board. If your employees, like Hazel said there, her example, 7 months, or even that could go up to 2 years, and then back to micro-retirement, etc. But it's to open the door for those people so that they don't have to essentially leave the organization, that there's actually an opportunity to come back to the organization because they're going to do it anyway. We go back to in HR, you develop people so that they can leave. They're human capital, but you treat them so that they don't want to leave. But if society, etc., is suggesting, micro-retirement, embrace that fact and leave the door open for these people to come back. Because these experiences, they become back more worldly, they might have taken up employment elsewhere, even on a part-time basis, traveled the world. They will come back with some skills, etc. They'll come back possibly a more rounded individual, and they potentially will come back with the grass is not always greener approach, that they can be actually a source of retention for your other employees, that they have had an experience elsewhere, and that, you left on good terms, people fulfilled the requirements, they came back. Because, if we look at the statistics now, in terms of employment, an individual entering the labour force, it's up to 17 careers, over 17 different jobs over their entire career. So job hopping, don't particularly like the word, but people are going to move. They're more transient. The world
career
is a lot
sampling
more global.
Per se.
Sorry?
Career sampling almost.
Exactly.
17 is an incredible number.
Getting,
over just
more
one
experience
lifespan.
elsewhere. But to me, that does increase human capital. Just because you have a degree or a master's in one particular area, and then you move into another area for a year, 18 months, whatever, you can always leverage on those skills. But it's about maximizing the skills that an individual has for the time that you have them. And it's not to get afraid about it. They're going to leave anyway. So it's about maximizing the potential while you have it, embracing the fact that they're going to leave, don't bring resentment into the argument, and potentially, if that was a good employee, leave the door open. That will, that will benefit everyone. That will benefit.
So really getting, I think, used to the idea of talent circulation rather than feeling, either that you have lost completely people that you have invested some resources into, but seeing it as, oh, it's possible that they might just come back. So from there, Hetal, I'd actually love to perhaps touch on a dimension that may not really be covered yet for the Malaysia or even the ASEAN market. We're quite often talking so much about youth, and not without fault, Our average age demographic is around 30.5 years of age. But at the same time, we're also an aging society. And data points are actually showing that this year in 2025, we can expect upwards of 13 to even 15% of retirees re-entering the workforce. Now, these would also then technically qualify under not just the Great Retiree Return as a block, but also workers with less tenure. So what do you have as some initial ideas about how workplaces can embrace the fact that older workers, retirees, perhaps many of them even also women, now want to come back into the workforce, and integrating them instead of losing too much of sleep over Gen Z who may want to go on a career transitioning path?
Right. So super interesting. Whenever we run these conversations with organizations, we ask people, what is it that you really want? Majority of them say, I want to retire. Okay. Right. Now, when they hit that moment in time, that 1 year before where they have to retire or they're coming up to retirement, they start then panicking. They're saying, is this what I really want? And when they do retire, they say, what do I do with all this time and this freedom? And once they taste that freedom does not feel that sweet, that's when typically they say, take me back. Let me contribute back to the world again, because this is really what life is about. And one of the organizations that we work with has done this really well. As you grow older and beyond the 60, 65, 70 brain frame, you have something called crystallized intelligence. It's not technical knowledge that you're out for, it's wisdom. And this is just such a beautiful thing to have. When you have an older person there, they've gone through so much. And because it is not forced labor, they want to be there. They come in with so much of a nurturing experience, wisdom. They're like, you know what, if you're struggling dealing with a board meeting, let me be there, let me support, let me facilitate a better conversation. And so when they come in, they have a certain position called advisors. Okay. Yeah, advisors or wise women and wise men that you can go and have a chat with. So in other words, they're doing a lot of work, but they're really
filling that, I think, mentorship gap, which quite often everybody at the C-suite level is probably too busy to.
Exactly. I have no time to deal with this, but these are the people who really enjoy that experience right now. And they do a phenomenal job at it. They do a beyond phenomenal job at it. And they often do a better job than what they did in the past, just in the last year of work,
Because then they would have most likely been in those C-suite managerial roles, very, very occupied.
With a lot more time, patience, wisdom, the calling is different. Before then it was a job, now it's a calling. So the way they behave and the way they show up is incredibly different and very peaceful, really. You need that in life.
Exactly. So as we're closing out the discussion, Hetal as well as Kenny, I'd just like a couple of main takeaways. So where do we go from here now that the report is out, and what actions do you hope will be taken and replicated at the policy making level that then can benefit and cascade down to as many workplaces and sectors in Malaysia as possible?
I think you probably said a lot of it there. I think we need to embrace an evidence-based approach to this. This needs to get on to the table of decision makers. This report, Ministry of HR, Ministry of Youth and Sport, Ministry of Women and Cultural Development, all of these people. And it's to embrace what it says. This report is not criticising anyone. It's just highlighting things that are of deep concern that could, if not addressed, move in towards a crisis. And, we just published the original pilot study of this. So now we're taking the different variables. We've only talked about the statistics, but the relationship between them, and taking this over time frames to see what is actually affecting what over time. And what we have found in our initial pilot study, published in the Asia Pacific Journal of HR, is that when risk is high, psychosocial risk is high, an individual's well-being goes down. When their psychological safety increases, their well-being increases. And it just goes to show that these things are having an effect. And then if we break that down further by demographics, we just used in the original stage age and gender, but they were hugely significant in the difference between them. So the risk you're having, the demands you're having at work versus the resources that you have to deal with them, i.e. the risk versus the safety, these are going to become more pronounced over time. And now that we have larger data sets, etc., this is going to become exactly more important.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Kenny, as well as Haytel. It's been such an insightful discussion about optimizing workplace well-being. Lots of data points, but at the same time, action needs to be taken and taken now. Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. I'm Tamina Kowski signing off. We'll be back again next Friday with more economic analysis and highlights. Here's to a productive week ahead.
Untuk sesi Parlimen kali ini, antara yang akan menjadi tumpuan iaitu pembentangan RUU berkaitan Akta Perlindungan Pemberi Maklumat 2010 ataupun Akta 711, iaitu satu akta penting untuk memberi perlindungan kepada individu untuk meningkatkan keberkesanan penyaluran maklumat bagi hal memerangi isu rasuah dan juga salah laku, dan untuk memudahkan pemberi maklumat membuat pendedahan kelakuan tidak wajar, melindungi orang yang membuat pendedahan daripada tindakan yang memudaratkan dan memastikan pendedahan itu disiasat sewajarnya. Jadi ramai pihak termasuk badan-badan bukan kerajaan iaitu NGO memerhati dengan dekat berkaitan dengan Akta Perlindungan Pemberi Maklumat 2010 dengan penambahbaikan baru ini, kerana mereka sudah pun berjuang begitu lama, sekian lama, bertahun lamanya untuk kerajaan mendengar dan juga memberi penambahbaikan kepada kelompongan Akta Perlindungan Pemberi Maklumat. Jadi Dr. Muhammad Mohan dari TI Malaysia sudah pun bersedia. Assalamualaikum Dr. Muhammad, apa khabar?
Waalaikumsalam, khabar baik. Terima kasih.
Dr. Muhammad Mohan, adakah kita yakin Akta Pemberi Maklumat ini dapat dibentangkan untuk bacaan kali pertama dalam sesi Parlimen awal Ramadan ini?
Kita berharap sungguh-sungguh sebab kami dari CSO ini telah berusaha selama 6 tahun membuat banyak perbincangan dengan bengkel demi bengkel, dan kami harap kali ini akta perubahan pindaan kepada Akta Perlindungan Pemberi Maklumat ini dapat dibentangkan pada sesi kali ini, dan kami juga dapat maklumat kemungkinan besar pindahan ini akan dibentangkan untuk bacaan pertama di Parlimen pada esok hari. Jadi insyaAllah kita berdoa supaya pembentangan ini dapat dilaksanakan pada esok hari.
Dr. Muhammad, mengapa Akta Pindaan Pemberi Maklumat 2025 ini amat mendesak kepada isu kita memerangi rasuah?
Okey, pertama dalam Akta Perlindungan Pemberi Maklumat ini 2010 yang masa tu sesuatu yang baik pada waktu itu sebab banyak negara tidak ada akta tersendiri. Tapi di Malaysia kita ada satu akta sendiri, ya. Jadi itu bagus. Tetapi bila kita teliti dalam provisi-provisi atau section-section berkenaan,
Satu section yang amat membimbangkan ialah Section 6. Section 6 tu pindahan kami buat 7 tuntutan dan antaranya ialah Section 6. Di mana dalam Section 6 ini kita ada masalah sebab seorang pemberi maklumat dia ingin mendapat perlindungan. Jadi bila dia diberi perlindungan, dia kalau penyiasatan melihat bahawa dia bercanggah dengan undang-undang lain. Contohnya di Malaysia, Akta Rahsia Resmi 1972. Yang lagi satu ialah Kanun Keseksaan 3A. Jadi kedua-dua ini terutama sekali untuk penjawat awam. Mereka bekerja dalam sektor awam dan mereka tertakluk pada Akta Rahsia Resmi. Jadi secara langsung mereka akan dikenakan bahawa mereka membuat kesalahan, bahawa mendedahkan maklumat dan sebagainya. Jadi oleh itu percanggahan ini, provisio dalam Section 6 ini perlu diperbetulkan. Jadi itu satu daripada perubahan yang wajib dibuat. Dan lagi satu perubahan yang penting, yang ini dua saya ingin sebut. Yang kedua ialah seorang pemberi maklumat sekiranya dia didapati terlibat dalam kelakuan tidak wajar, secara automatik perlindungan akan ditarik balik. Jadi kami rasa ini tidak sepatutnya. Dia sepatutnya dalam kes-kes tertentu mereka yang terlibat ini dipaksa terlibat, terutama sekali penjawat awam muda yang baru masuk, dia tidak tahu apa dan kumpulan yang terlibat dalam rasuah ni memaksa dia terlibat. Jadi bila dia insaf dan ingin bertaubat, kita perlu beri ruang pada ini. Jadi kita ingin syorkan supaya akta itu diberi buat perubahan sedikit di mana budi bicara penyiasatan digunakan supaya bila dia pasti dengan pemberi maklumat ini memberi maklumat secara suci hati, good faith, maka kes-kes tertentu ini dia perlu diberi perlindungan. Jadi ini dua perkara yang amat penting dalam perubahan.
Dari pengamatan Dr. Muhammad Mohan dengan keterlibatan TI dan juga badan-badan sivil yang lain termasuk para akademik dan juga pengamal undang-undang dari beberapa siri bengkel libat urus dan juga perbincangan mesyuarat dan sebagainya. Adakah rekomendasi utama yang dikatakan tadi oleh TI diberi perhatian untuk dibentangkan pada kali ini?
Dari apa yang kami difahamkan dan juga kami banyak kali memberi kenyataan untuk memberi peringatan pada terutama sekali bahagian hal ehwal undang-undang dan juga pada kerajaan, terutama sekali Section 6 ini. Memberi maklumat ini perlu diberi perlindungan walaupun dia melanggar undang-undang lain. Sebab dia di sini, dia bukan memberi maklumat kepada sesiapa, media ke dan sebagainya. Dia memberi maklumat pada pihak penguat kuasa. Jadi kalau berlaku salah laku, dia harus diberi perlindungan. Jadi apa yang saya faham sampai setakat ini, kerajaan akan membentangkan pindahan ini dan Section 6 ini akan dipindah. Tetapi sekiranya Section 6 ini tidak dimasukkan atau maksud saya dilarutkan, maksudnya impact dia tidak ada dengan perubahan yang sedikit dan sebagainya, maka perubahan ini sia-sia. Jadi kami telah memberi kenyataan yang keras dan juga dalam dialog kami dengan Menteri Perundangan dan Reformasi Datuk Seri Azalina, saya sendiri menyatakan pada beliau bahawa tolong pastikan Section 6 perubahan ini dibuat. Dan apa yang saya boleh menyatakan di sini, beliau faham isu yang sebenar, apa masalah yang sebenar. Jadi kami harap dengan usaha yang dibuat oleh Menteri, Section 6 dan juga 5-6 section lain akan dipindahkan pada dalam sesi ini.
Pada bulan lalu, bahagian hal undang-undang ada memberi kenyataan bahawa antara cadangan yang diberi perhatian iaitu merangkumi pengubahsuaian proviso di bawah Section 6. membuat pendedahan berhubung sebarang kelakuan tidak wajar selaras dengan tafsiran kelakuan tidak wajar di bawah Seksyen 2 Akta 711. Ia juga termasuk penambahbaikan Seksyen 11 Akta 711 bagi peruntukan pembatalan perlindungan. Adakah ini satu kenyataan yang memberangsangkan yang positif dari bahagian hal ehwal undang-undang untuk kita jangkakan apa yang akan dibentangkan, Dr. Muhammad?
Ya. Memang saya bila baca kenyataan itu saya amat gembira sebab ini yang kami tuntut. Walaupun ada 6-7 tuntutan lain tapi yang utama sekali ialah 2 tuntutan ini. Jadi kami harap perkara ini apa yang dinyatakan oleh pihak Bayu akan juga dibentangkan di parlimen pada esok hari. Tetapi kita kena ingat dari pengalaman yang dulu-dulu berkenaan dengan akta-akta yang lain, ada kalanya di saat-saat terakhir mungkin ada agensi tertentu yang memberi bantahan dan sebagainya. Tapi apa yang saya difahamkan, apa yang telah dibentangkan di kabinet, kabinet pun luluskan. Jadi saya harap tidak ada sebarang gangguan dan apa yang mereka menyatakan akan dapat dibentangkan di Dewan Rakyat esok.
Berkaitan dengan penambahbaikan untuk Akta Pemberi Maklumat 2025 ini, antara yang menjadi tumpuan iaitu kes-kes yang terbaharu dalam setahun 2 ini, iaitu pemberi maklumat yang tidak merujuk kepada pihak SPRM untuk melaporkan isu kecurangan, isu berkaitan ketirisan ataupun isu rasuah, tetapi mereka merujuk ataupun lebih awal melaporkan kepada pihak media dan media melaporkan ada maklumat berkaitan kegiatan meminta wang di sebuah negeri, dan pihak SPRM memberikan komen bahawa ia secara automatik orang yang demikian tidak layak untuk dibawa di bawah kategori akta pemberi maklumat ataupun whistleblower, dan kes itu tidak ada valid ataupun tidak ada pengesahan kerana ia tidak dilaporkan lebih dahulu kepada pihak SPRM. Adakah itu juga akan dilihat semula dalam penambahbaikan akta whistleblower 2025, Dr. Muhammad?
Okey, pertama kita kena faham undang-undang yang sedia ada di sini, pemberi maklumat akan diberi perlindungan sekiranya mereka melaporkan pada pihak penguatkuasa. Itu undang-undang sekarang. Jadi dalam kes yang video di Sabah itu, pemberi maklumat ini mula-mula menunjuk pada pihak penguatkuasa dan meminta perlindungan atau garanti supaya tidak ada tindakan diambil. Jadi dalam kes ini, pemberi maklumat ini diberi ruang oleh SPRM untuk membuat laporan segera supaya mereka boleh ambil tindakan. Tetapi apa yang berlaku tidak begitu. Pemberi maklumat ini terus ke media dan mendedahkan segala maklumat dan sebagainya. Bukti. Masalah di sini ialah kita kena faham, bila sesuatu siasatan kena dibuat, banyak bukti amat diperlukan. Jadi kita perlu faham dari pandangan penyiasat. Bila bukti itu tidak kukuh, bila diserahkan kepada pihak pengguam negara, mereka akan pastikan sama ada kes ini ada peluang untuk menang atau tidak. Because kalau bukti itu tak kukuh, kes itu susah di waktu perbicaraan. Jadi itu sebab bila perkara ini didedahkan kepada media dan sebagainya, pihak penyiasat akan mengalami masalah untuk membuat penyiasatan. Jadi dalam sesi kali ini, pembentangan tidak akan mengganggu seksyen itu. Ia tetap perlu dilaporkan kepada pihak penguasa. Saya ingin tambah di sini, 3 minggu dulu, Menteri Perundangan dan Reformasi Datuk Seri Azalina Osman dalam ucapan beliau di Dewan Rakyat, beliau menyatakan bahawa di negara-negara lain, contohnya di negara US, kalau tak salah saya, dia merujuk, di mana kalau mereka pemberi maklumat melaporkan kepada pihak penguatkuasa dan pihak penguatkuasa tidak mengambil tindakan, dia ada tempoh 90 hari. Kalau tidak ambil tindakan, pemberi maklumat berhak untuk melaporkan kepada media dan masih boleh diberi perlindungan. Tapi perkara itu kita belum bincang lagi, dan itu sebab kami rasa dari TI dan CSO lain, kita tidak menekankan pada isu ini buat masa ini. Mungkin itu fasa kedua kita akan bincang dan melihat bagaimana. Tetapi setakat ini cuma boleh melapor kepada pihak penguatkuasa.
sempena musim perayaan ini. Semua dijemput ke KLCC pada 15 dan 16 Mac untuk pesta meriah lain macam Astro. Kenali rancangan-rancangan eksklusif raya kami. Bersalam mesra dengan artis-artis kegemaran. Senyuman lebaran lebih indah dengan persembahan istimewa di hari yang mulia. Anda sekeluarga dijemput. Raya lebih meriah dengan Astro.
5 lelaki penghantar makanan didakwa di Mahkamah Magistrate Bangi atas tuduhan membunuh seorang pemandu kereta lelaki dalam satu kejadian.
4 sungai di sekitar kawasan perindustrian Pasir Gudang di Johor termasuk Sungai Kim Kim didapati tercemar dan berada pada tahap yang membimbangkan. Kerajaan sudah mulakan inisiatif untuk menggantikan kenderaan operasinya kepada kenderaan elektrik EV dalam skala kecil terlebih dahulu.
Dia sekarang ini disyaki membunuh.
Satu cara je. Aku akan bunuh Ibu Sarah.
It's all here. Macam mana boleh terbongkar? You have no right to spy on me.
Berapa ramai lagi orang kena mati sebelum kita menang, Chan?
Sekarang lawan aku yang jahat.
It's a trap.
One Cent Thief Season 2. Stream episod baru setiap Jumaat on demand di Astro Citra